From the News Channel 5 network, this is Sportsline.
Hey there, Sportsline on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Monday night on News Channel 5 Plus. We're going to dive into a lot of things tonight. We hope you want to be a part of the conversation as well. 615-737-7767 is the number. As always, we invite your phone calls and you to be a part of the discussion. We can get into what was really a pretty good Sunday championship football. I thought the NFC championship game in particular was fascinating, with the Bucs and Tom Brady getting off to that big lead, 28-10 early in the third quarter. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers fighting their way back. The inexplicable call from Matt LaFleur at the end of the game, and of course the Bucs able to salt away the clock down the finish. In the AFC, it played out a lot like a scenario the Titans fans will remember from a year ago. I mean, remember, Tennessee went in, led by double digits in the first half against the Chiefs at Arrowhead. That's what the Bills essentially had. They missed an extra point, so it was 9-0, but led by 2 scores in the first half. The only difference was Kansas City responded more quickly. Last year, it took basically right before halftime before you felt like, okay, Kansas City's got this game kind of back into their control. And then in the second half, they found a way to stretch that lead, and they won 35-24. Yesterday, it felt like Kansas City was back in it a little bit more quickly, and then they ended up winning again, 38-24. So similar type games, but once again, the Chiefs get their hands on the Lamar Hunt Trophy, the AFC Championship Trophy named after their founder, the late Lamar Hunt. And now they head back to Super Bowl 55, trying to repeat after winning last year in the state of Florida. They did it in Miami last year. They will try to do it in Tampa Bay this year, facing the homestanding Tampa Bay Bucs, a team that went 3 straight weeks on the road in the playoffs as a wild card team, but now becomes the first team ever to play a Super Bowl in their home stadium. Not that home field advantage has meant a lot for anybody this year due to the lack of fans, but there will certainly be a lot of excitement in the city of Tampa to see the Bucs in the Super Bowl and doing it at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay. And we're probably going to see our biggest crowd for a sporting event in quite some time. It's going to be more than 22,000 people there, many of whom are going to be invited healthcare workers who have already had their 2 rounds of the vaccination. So they're going to be allowed to be in the stadium, as well as about 14,000, maybe 14,500 ticket holders, whether that be NFL corporate sponsors or fans of the 2 teams. So it should be one of the best football atmospheres we've seen in quite some time. I think we're all welcoming that idea back. And it should be a great matchup because you have Tom Brady, who will be playing in a record 10th Super Bowl, but his first with Tampa Bay, doing it as his first year as the Buccaneers quarterback, taking on the guy I think is hands down the greatest player in the NFL right now in Patrick Mahomes. His body of work over the last 3-4 seasons is just unlike anything else we've really seen. And so I think you're looking at the GOAT, the greatest of all time, against the current greatest of the moment in Patrick Mahomes, who knows, the way he's going, maybe he'll do something similar to what Brady has done at some point, because he is doing incredible things week in and week out and year out as quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. So that's your setup for Super Bowl 55. We can dive into more of that as well. We can also talk more about the Titans and what they can do in this offseason. How do they put themselves back in this conversation? This year was a good year. There's no question about it. But it ends in week 1 of the playoffs. And ultimately, when you get to this stage, whether you're a division champion or you're a wild card like the Titans were last year, the goal is to survive in advance. The goal is to get to championship weekend, have a shot to win an AFC or an NFC title, and ultimately get to the Super Bowl and win that and hoist the Lombardi Trophy. Last year, the Titans fell 2 wins shy of that goal, got to the Final Four. This year, they're out in round 1. That's going to gnaw at some people in the offseason. So how do they get back to that point? What do they need? That's kind of the real question. Obviously, they need that defense to be much better. Whether that's Mike Vrabel identifying a defensive coordinator, whether that's changing up the scheme, whether that's just getting some new players in after guys that they were banking on this year, like Jadeveon Clowney or Vic Beasley or Jonathan Joseph, or even, frankly, a guy like Adoree Jackson. Guys they either signed to bring in to help this year or were just hurt and not able to give the team their best throughout the course of the season. That's got to be different. So where do you go in that regard? That's another question for the offseason for the Titans. And then I posed this question, and we did this a little bit last night on the Electric Power Company's Sunday Sports Central. But if you remember back to last year when the Titans walked off the field at Arrowhead Stadium losing in the AFC Championship game, and then the season wrapped itself up and people started looking to the offseason and free agency. And then we got the wind that Tom Brady was likely going to leave New England, which he ultimately did. And when that happened, all the betting odds and the prognosticators said the place he's most likely to end up is Tennessee. He's got connections with Mike Vrabel there. They do things similar to the way the Patriots do things, and that team just went to the AFC Championship game. And if Brady's going to leave, he wants to go someplace where he can step in, and the team is already good. It's not a rebuilding effort because he doesn't have that much time left. So he's going to go to someplace like that. Tennessee seems like a great fit for Tom Brady. That's what everybody talked about. And it seemed like there was a decent shot that it could happen. Ultimately, as we know, the Titans signed Ryan Tannehill. They rewarded him for the great season he had last year and getting them to the AFC Championship game. And, oh, by the way, beating Brady in the wild card round in New England. The Titans beat the Patriots on that day. And so they rewarded Tannehill with a 4-year, $118 million contract to be the quarterback of the future here in Tennessee. But that meant they passed up on Brady, or at least being in the Brady Sweepstakes, and he goes and signs with Tampa Bay. And a lot of things happened in Tampa Bay. I mean, you had guys who were probably on their way out coming back. You had other guys who were free agents re-signing in Tampa Bay, in some cases for a little less money for the opportunity to stay there. You had some free agents from the outside come in to join him in Tampa Bay. It was a busy and productive offseason for the Buccaneers, and it all started with the signing of Tom Brady and how that trickles down to other decisions that you make and other guys that you can attract. Because remember, the Buccaneers were not completely devoid of talent. This was a team that had Mike Evans, and it had Godwin, and it had a solid offensive line. It had some pass rushers on defense. It had playmakers. But it didn't have much of a winning culture. It had been 12 years until this season since the last time the Buccaneers were in the playoffs. 18 years since the last time they made a Super Bowl. There just wasn't a winning culture. And with Jameis Winston at quarterback, you had a quarterback that just brought the team down. They maybe were better than what they did the last couple of years, but they couldn't accomplish it with Jameis Winston at quarterback. But nobody knew what they could accomplish with Tom Brady at quarterback. I don't think anybody rightfully thought that the Buccaneers were going to the Super Bowl. I mean, there were a few out there, a few huge, big-time believers in Tom Brady, mostly. But I think people thought, okay, this team's automatically going to be good now, but can they actually get to the Super Bowl? And do they have any shot to win it? And I think most people thought that might be too soon. Might be a bridge too far even for a guy like Tom Brady. And then you have to remember the fact that there was no offseason program this year. It was all done virtually around the NFL, including in Tampa. But Tom Brady, being who he is and with all the rings that he has, was able to get teammates to get together. Local parks, high schools, etc. And they worked out on their own time, away from the facility, so outside of the NFL purview and jurisdiction, and got down to work. in a way that I don't know if you saw replicated anywhere else around the league. But that's the power that Tom Brady has. One, it's the motivation he has that he was going to leave New England and the legacy and the dynasty and all of that behind. And he was going to go to a new place, and there was no other option but to win. If he was going to make that move, they had to continue to win. He had to further his legacy. And so he got right down and put his nose to the grind immediately. And he got everybody else to follow suit. Because that's the thing. When you're a true leader and you are as great as that, it's not just what you do on the field, it's how you get others to buy in. And the people who followed Tom Brady either initially to go to Tampa Bay, I mean, remember, Rob Gronkowski came back out of retirement to join TB in TB. And then you get all these other guys who show up, and even the guys who were already there. When the GOAT walks in and says, how about we get together later today and do a little 7-on-7 at whatever high school down the street? If you're a young guy, second, third year in the league, and you've had no success to this point, heck yeah, you're going out there. You want to impress that guy. You want to follow it. You want to do whatever he's doing. And that's what Tampa Bay did. They started off the season well after an opening week loss in New Orleans. They got off to a good start. Bogged down a little bit middle of the season. Fell to 7-5 against the Chiefs, by the way, in week 12. But they found something in the second half. And here's the other thing that Brady's great at. He's great at adjusting. When things don't work, he's great at doing other things. I mean, he's going to be a Hall of Famer among many reasons for all the stats he's put up passing. But Tom Brady's one of the great guys at the line of scrimmage and audibling and getting his team into the perfect situation against the defense. And he did that time and time again throughout the course of his career in New England. And he did it again in Tampa Bay. When they were struggling against Kansas City, he kind of got together with Bruce Arians and said, we got to fix this. We got to be different than this. And they essentially changed their offense on the fly in the second half of that game. They nearly came back and won. But that started what is now a 7-game winning streak. 4 games to end the season to get in as a wild card team. A trip to Washington to win. A trip to New Orleans where they beat the Saints, the winner of their division, by the way, whom they lost to twice during the regular season. And not all that close either time. They played that well. Brady was brilliant in both of those games. And then they go to Green Bay, frozen tundra, NFC Championship on the line, likely MVP Aaron Rodgers on the other side, and Brady goes out there and builds a 28-10 lead. Now, he wasn't perfect. He had 3 interceptions in the second half. I think they were all on him. He actually looked mortal for a brief period of time there. He needed to rely on the defense to save the day and hold on to that lead and win 31-26 to move on. But he still built the 28-10 lead. He threw 3 touchdowns in the NFC Championship game, and he won another one. His 10th championship game victory of his career. And now he's back in yet another Super Bowl. That is just what Tom Brady does. And so we asked this question last night, and I think it's fair. Would the Titans' season have been different had they made the decision to go with Brady as opposed to sinking their teeth in and going long-term with Tannehill? And that's not a knock on Tannehill, by the way. He was great in 2019. He's a huge part of the reason they made the run in the playoffs they did. He came back this year and was just as good. 3,800 yards passing, 40 total touchdowns. You're talking about all-time great numbers within the Titans franchise. So this isn't a knock on Ryan Tannehill. I don't think Brady upgrades your production, if at all, in terms of what you're getting from the quarterback position. The only question I have is all of those intangibles that I just laid out. And mostly when you get into the postseason, when it comes down to going on the road and having to win a game, or having to win a game when your star running back gets buttoned down like he did against the Ravens a couple of weeks ago. Tom Brady has experience, and time and time again in his career has found ways to win those games in the playoffs. He's found ways to win home or away. He's found ways to win playing his best football and sometimes not his best football. He's found ways to win on absolutely magnificent teams that will go down as some of the greatest in NFL history, and some teams, frankly, that weren't that great, perhaps, but still found ways to win. That team he won the Super Bowl 2 years ago in Atlanta with, from New England, that was not an all-time great team. It wasn't an all-time great Brady year, frankly, statistically. But somehow they go into Kansas City and beat this Chiefs team and beat Patrick Mahomes, and they go to Atlanta and they knock out the Rams in the championship game. That, to me, is the essence of Brady. The idea that 1 week he can throw it 52 times and beat you, and the next week he can hand it off 47 times and beat you. It isn't all about him, and he's the first one to say that it is a complete team game. But anybody who thought it was a organizational thing in New England, or it was Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick, and Tom Brady, and sometimes in that order, or Belichick and Kraft and then Brady, that it wasn't him at the top of the billing, that debate is over now after what you saw yesterday. And again, yesterday wasn't his best performance. He wasn't very good even in the second half of the game. But he's now led this team from 7-5 to 7 straight wins, including 3 in a row on the road in the playoffs, the last 2 against Hall of Fame quarterbacks on the other side, to get back to a 10th Super Bowl, which is twice as many as anybody else at the quarterback position in the history of the league. He's already won 6. And what he's done has just been phenomenal. And now he's doing it with a whole nother team in his very first season under some of the most trying circumstances you could ever play a season out under. That is all-time greatness. It is not just best quarterback of all time. That discussion is over. I don't think it's a debate about best player in the NFL anymore. I think it's clear that Tom Brady is the best football player of all time, given what he's done. I think now, and especially if he goes and wins 2 Sundays from now against Kansas City and gets another Super Bowl and does it with a different team now at age 43, you have to start having the conversation and asking the question, if Tom Brady is the greatest team sport athlete ever, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, Babe Ruth, whoever you want to put in that conversation, he belongs in it at this point. That's just the bottom line. And so Brady cemented his legacy yesterday. What he did in Tampa is phenomenal. But I do think there is a question you can ask. Would he have had the same impact here? Because I think he would have had a major impact. Now, again, don't get this wrong. This isn't a slight to Tannehill and his production, because he's been a great quarterback, a really good quarterback in this league the last couple years. And the other thing you have to remember is Brady's defense did him a real solid yesterday when he didn't play particularly well. There were not many times this year, if any, that the Titans' defense bailed out the offense, or bailed out Tannehill when he made a bad throw, or Henry when he put the football on the turf, in the few times that happened with those stars. The Titans' defense didn't rise to the occasion very much to help them out. It was an atrocious defense. And Tom Brady wouldn't have fixed the pass rush. And he wouldn't have fixed the defensive scheme we were talking about, or been the defensive coordinator. But I do wonder, if you get Brady, does the offseason look a little bit different for the Titans? Does the regular season look a little bit different for the Titans? But most importantly, when you put all that together, when you get to the playoffs and the chips are truly down, does it just change the vibe? Is there a different level of confidence? Is there a different level of get it done if the guy who's got it done more than anybody in the history of sport is under center? I don't know. It's a hypothetical. We'll never be able to answer it. But it was just interesting to me yesterday, looking at the exact same day, leaving Championship Sunday a year ago, people looked at the Titans and said, they're on the cusp. They need another piece or another two. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that quarterback situation. They decided to stay put at quarterback, go with Tannehill, the sort of the proven commodity in-house, and try to make decisions elsewhere. And it didn't work. Tannehill was great, offense was great, but the other things they did didn't work. Meanwhile, Brady goes to Tampa Bay, where there was talent. There was some talent there, but there was no winning culture, there was no history of success, and there was no idea from the outside that that team could even come close to making a run to the Super Bowl this year. And then he signs, and it changes things. It changes how things look, and obviously now you've got the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. So it'll be a very interesting game to watch coming up in a couple of weeks. 737-7767 is the number if you would like to get in on the discussion. What do you think about that? What do you think about the Titans' choice last year and now the choices they face moving into this offseason? We can dive in on all those discussions. We can talk about the championship games from yesterday or anything else as well. We go to the lines first and say hello to Stuart. Stuart, welcome to Sportsline. How are you?
All right, but going to have to call you out, Steve. I hope you don't hang up on me.
Won't hang up on you, I promise.
Anyway, I've watched you for a long time, and you've never been a real supporter of the Titans overall, which is okay. That's your prerogative. You're a sports person, and you go where you go. But in answer to one of the questions you asked, no, Brady would not have made a difference here. Vrabel has done real well with what he's done with this team. It's improved every year with the exception of the defense this year, which I believe he probably realizes he made a mistake by not getting a coordinator to replace Pease when Pease decided to retire again. But with back to the games this weekend and whatnot and the playoffs, in society in general, like in this country, we have the Constitution, we have laws and regulations and things that we all supposed to go by. In the NFL, they've got a rule book. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, yeah. It's massive.
It's huge. Correct?
Yeah, it's huge.
What gets me with the NFL in general, the referees are not full-time employees. They are not held accountable. Goodall never calls them out. The coaches can't call them out. The owners can't call them out because they'll get fined by the league itself and all that. There was tons of missed calls, and I even said it during the NFC game as I was watching it, and when they're not calling the calls, and then 2 minutes later, the commentators are going, oh, well, they're really letting them play. No. There's a rule book there that says this is a foul. You're supposed to call it. And they don't get called. And I know that, we're not going to change this in this conversation this evening we're having, but I'm just curious on your thoughts on that because, no, those rules and regulations in that rule book is there for a reason. And when they don't get called, it's like, why are the officials not calling them?
Well,
and this goes throughout the whole football season.
Well, Stuart, I would agree with that, and thanks for the call, that the biggest thing you want is consistency. And what I've seen in these playoffs is I've seen an inconsistent whistle or flag from what I saw in the regular season from a lot of these things. And the best explanation I can give for that, and from talking to people around the league, is the idea that when you get into the playoffs, you're often graded out by the coaches who are in the game and other people. And it's long been thought of that if you let them play, and it's a quote-unquote clean game with not a lot of flags and the officials not inserting themselves very much, that's your best recipe as a referee to move on and for your crew to move on. And so what you have is crews essentially holding back on making calls that they'd made for 17 weeks during the course of the season. I don't think that's good, and I don't think that's how it should be decided here. And I think even within the games yesterday, I don't think this cost anybody the game. I'm not trying to say that. But if you're a Green Bay fan today, I think it's reasonable to wake up and be upset about the pass interference call that clinched the game. Because we watched for basically 4 quarters, 3 quarters and 13 minutes or something like that? We watched them swallow the whistles on contact 2 receivers all afternoon. And I'm okay with that if you're going to do it consistently. If you're going to say, okay, we're going to let them play. That's just what we're doing today. We're going to let them play. Okay. Well, then I don't think you can call that flag. I'm not sure it was catchable anyway. But I don't think you can call that flag there if that's how you're treating it the rest of the day. Again, I don't think that cost the Packers the game. The Matt LaFleur decision's a way bigger issue from the final couple minutes of that game than the flag. But I get it if you're a Packers fan today and you want to complain about that flag given what you'd watched leading up to that moment. But I do think the NFL, I agree, I wish NFL officials were full-time employees. I think you'd have a better chance of consistency and knowing what you're getting week in and week out if that was the case. But the biggest thing is, whatever you're calling, call it the same from the first quarter to the end of the game. And do it the way you feel you're supposed to, not the way that you feel will allow you the best chance to move on in the postseason. I think we saw that yesterday. All right, back to the phones to Armand. Armand, how are you?
Hello?
Hello. You are on
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you are on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Armin Knight, and the last young man, he made the statement about the Constitution and stuff like that, and I have to really commend him about that because that's not brought up in a lot of these situations. So let's get an understanding here, and which the world is starting to realize this. And the NFL is one of the biggest corrupt money makers on planet Earth, other than the politicians. So you have owners that pay in to be able to judge and prejudge these games. You have in the NFL today, there is no loyalty in the NFL today because everybody is greedy and it all revolves around money. Okay, so it is really curious that you hear people complain about their team or whatnot, but they are blinded to what really happens behind closed doors dealing with the NFL. So let's talk about the gentleman that came over here to this country from Nigeria, one of the famous doctors that was lied to or laughed at by the NFL when he was bringing up different issues about players dying from impact and helmets not properly indicated or fitting on the players and all this other stuff. And this was a black man. And matter of fact, it was a black man that wasn't from this country. And he was ridiculed, judged by every person, not even including the NFL, but as civilians. Judge this man, determined to break down his character and who he was as a doctor. The NFL was sued over this because that man was able to find lies and deceit by the NFL that tried to hide this from the world. Now, if you look in the NFL and you look at the percentage of the potential players are majority of black. Now, you have a lot of Caucasian players that are good, but all the main potential comes from black athletes, and they're distorted not only by the NFL, not only by colleges, but as well as schools. But nobody talks about that. Everybody talks about, well, I'm pissed off because my team didn't win. Is a reason why Green Bay's got fucked over. Is the reason why this system is set up the way it is is behind money. That is the reality part about it. And it's sad, and it's still happening in today. That's with any big corporation. They can care less about the human beings that's making these millions of dollars, bringing the world together on a football game.
All right, Armin.
One of the biggest things about America is to be able to watch football.
Yeah.
Every American in this world, in this nation, is passionate about football. But where they're not passionate at is what goes on behind closed doors.
Well,
all the corruption that goes on behind closed doors, not even with the NFL, but the colleges as well as high school.
Armin, I appreciate the call. There's some interesting stuff there, and maybe some other day we can unpack it more thoroughly all the way through. But I think you make some interesting points. I'll just say this, though. When you talk about the NFL exploiting players, trust me, they've got some issues in the health background things, but they've made massive advancements in the last 5-6 years in terms of helmets and what they're doing and concussion protocols and all those sort of things. And the bottom line is the guys who are playing the sport sign up to play it. They know the risks, and they still do it. One, because they love it, and two, because it comes with big-time paychecks. And for a lot of those guys, and you brought it up, you brought the racial divide into it, and there's no question, the league is majority black. But for a lot of these guys, regardless of the color, their best opportunity in life has been to make it in the NFL and to use their own talents to get big-time contracts, make a ton of money, and use that into setting up their family for future generations or moving into other business avenues after football. I don't think, especially in the middle of a pandemic, there are a lot of people around the country worried about how much they're being exploited when they're getting paid by that. I'm not even sure how many people will follow you into that discussion, because most of the guys in the league, and I get to talk to a lot of them, they all tell me and have told me when the concussion thing came up, when you talked about ALS possibly being linked, which is that's very loose, and there isn't a great deal of evidence that it's definitive that that can happen from the pounding that you take in the NFL. But when you bring those things up to guys will say, yeah, sure, that's a concern. But I know this is a violent sport. I know different things need to happen, and I'm willing to still do it. That's how they've always been. All right, we got to sneak one more in here and take a break. Let's go to Michael. Michael, what's going on? Hey, Michael, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah. I just want to say that I agree that Tom Brady is the best that's ever played in any team sport.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you calling in and just joining in on the conversation. I think it is part of the discussion now. I think it's no longer a football discussion with Brady. I think it is let's compare him to Michael Jordan. Let's compare him to Wayne Gretzky. Let's compare him to those other guys in other sports, because I think he's far surpassed what's been done in football so far. We got to take a break. We'll be back after this.